Here's the guys who are sitting here. Here we are again at the Yokohama Commonwealth War Cemetery. It's December 26, 2019. I'm here again with the groundskeeper who's making his own video over there. Okay. The Battle of Hong Kong from 8th to 25th December 1941, also known as the Defense of Hong Kong and the Fall of Hong Kong, was one of the first battles of the Pacific War in World War II. On the same morning as the attack on Pearl Harbor, forces of the Empire of Japan attacked the British Crown colony of Hong Kong. The attack was in violation of international law, as Japan had not declared war against the British Empire. The Hong Kong garrison consisted of British, Indian, and Canadian units, besides Chinese soldiers and conscripts from both within and outside Hong Kong. Locations which played an important role in setting the pace of military operations during December 1941 include Tai Pao Road, the Shing Mun Redoubt Trench, and tunnel complex in the Gin Drinkers Line, Devil's Peak, Ma Lo Tong, Liao Mun, also spelled as Lai Moon or Lei Yui Mun, North Point, Aldrich Bay, Quarry Bay, Shaoqiwan, Cylon Hill, Wong Nei Chong Gap or the Wong Nai Chong Gap, Tai Tam or the Tai Tam Gap and Reservoirs, Shosun Hill, and Stanley Fort. Coastal defense batteries, including those at Stonecutters Island, Pak Sha Wan, Lai Mun Fort, Sai Wan, Mount Collinson, Mount Parker, Belchers, Mount Davis, Jubilee Hill, Pokhara, and Stanley, provided artillery support for ground operations till they were put out of action or surrendered. Within a week, the defenders abandoned the mainland, and less than 2 weeks later, with their position on the island untenable, the colony had raised the white flag of surrender. Britain first thought of Japan as a threat with the ending of the Anglo-Japanese alliance in the early 1920s, a threat that increased with the escalation of the Second Sino-Japanese War. On 21st October 1938, the Japanese occupied Canton, or Guangzhou, and Hong Kong was surrounded. British defense studies concluded that Hong Kong would be extremely hard to defend in the event of a Japanese attack. But in the mid-1930s, work began on improvements to defenses, including along the Gin Drinkers Line. By 1940, the British determined to reduce the Hong Kong garrison to only a symbolic size. Air Chief Marshal Sir Robert Brooke Popham, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Far East Command, argued that limited reinforcements could allow the garrison to delay a Japanese attack, gaining time elsewhere. Winston Churchill and the General Staff named Hong Kong as an outpost and decided against sending more troops. In September 1941, they reversed their decision and argued that additional reinforcements would provide a military deterrent against the Japanese and reassured Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek that Britain was serious about defending the colony. According to the History Manual of the United States Military Academy, Japanese control of Canton, Hainan Island, French Indochina, and Formosa virtually sealed the fate of Hong Kong well before the firing of the first shot. British military in Hong Kong grossly underestimated the capabilities of the Japanese forces and downplayed the Japanese threat as unpatriotic and insubordinate. U.S. Consul Robert Ward, the highest-ranking U.S. official posted to Hong Kong in the period preceding the outbreak of hostilities, offered a first-hand explanation for the rapid collapse of defenses in Hong Kong by saying that the local British community had insufficiently prepared itself, or the Chinese populace, for war, besides highlighting the prejudiced attitudes held by those governing the Crown Colony of Hong Kong. Several of them, the British rulers, said frankly that they would rather turn the island over to the Japanese rather than to turn it over to the Chinese, by which they meant rather they employ Chinese to defend the colony, they would surrender it to the Japanese. According to U.S. Consul Robert Ward, when the real fighting came, it was the British soldiery that broke and ran. The Eurasians fought well, and so did the Indians, but the Kowloon line broke when the Royal Scots gave way. The same thing happened on the mainland. Colonel Reynolds Condon, a U.S. Army Assistant Military Attaché who witnessed the battle and was taken prisoner by the Japanese, wrote up in his observations on military preparedness before the commencement of hostilities and also the execution of operations thereafter. The Indian Army. During World War II, soldiers of the Indian Army were involved in the Battle of Hong Kong. The 5th Rajput Regiment took up Garrison at Hong Kong in June 1937, followed by the 2nd of the 14th Punjab in November 1940. Indian troops were also incorporated within several overseas regiments, as for example the Hong Kong Singapore Royal Artillery Regiment, which had Indian or Sikh gunners. Hong Kong Mule Corps was almost entirely staffed by Dogras and Punjabi Muslimans. Medical personnel from the Indian Medical Service tended to those injured in combat. Ex-servicemen from India serving as security guards in Hong Kong also suffered appallingly huge casualties. 2 of the 3 battalions stationed at the Gin Drinkers line were from the Indian Army, the 2nd 14th Battalion of the Punjab Regiment in the center section, and the 5th 7th Battalion, the Rajput Regiment, in the western sector. The 2nd Battalion, Royal Scots, were assigned to the western sector. When Mainland Infantry Brigade was ordered to retreat to Hong Kong Island, the Rajputs were tasked with defending the northeast sector and Punjab to the northwest sector, including Victoria City, or Hong Kong City. Royal Scots were reassigned the Wan Chai filter beds. Details regarding the involvement of military personnel from the Indian subcontinent in the Battle of Hong Kong has been published in Official History of the Indian Armed Forces in the Second World War, 1939-45. Campaigns in Southeast Asia, 1941-42. Hong Kong, Malaya, and Sarawak and Borneo, which draws significantly from the UK War Office reports, which appeared in London Gazette, number 38183. Operations in the Far East from 17th October 1940 to 27th December 1941, and other sources. Battalions from both Indian Army regiments from the British Raj earned battle honours for the defence of Hong Kong. 5th Battalion of the 7th Rajput Regiment and the 2nd Battalion of the 14th Punjab Regiment saw combat during the Japanese assault on Kowloon Peninsula at Tai Po Road and Shingmun Redoubt, Mai Long Tong, and Devil's Peak, and Hong Kong Island, Lai Mun, North Point, Causeway Bay, Sai Wan, Leighton Hill, Shoshone Hill, Brick Hill, Wan Chai, Happy Valley, Mong Ne Chong Gap, and Mount Parrish. First significant exchanges of fire with troops of the Imperial Japanese Army was through the 2nd of the 14th Punjab at 1500 hours after the invaders had crossed into Laffin's Plain. On 8th December 1941, forward troops of the 2nd 14th Punjab drew first blood by eliminating a detachment at 1830 hours and virtually wiped out a Japanese platoon on Tai Po Road at 1930 hours. During the Battle of Hong Kong, the 5th 7 Rajputs faced the onslaught of the Imperial Japanese Army troops very early on, and were the last soldiers to depart from the mainland when Kowloon was evacuated on 13 December 1941. At the beginning of the Pacific War, 5th 7 Rajput was tasked with front-line defense of the eastern section of Gin Drinkers Line on the mainland Kowloon Peninsula. Despite being subjected to dive bombing and heavy mortar fire, the Rajputs succeeded in holding Devil's Peak on the mainland until ordered to retreat across Lyman Strait to Hong Kong Island. On Hong Kong Island, they were assigned to defenses located all along the north shoreline. On 18 December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Army launched the invasion of Hong Kong Island by landing first at North Point. The first troops to engage them were the Rajputs, who continued to offer resistance until the regiment virtually ceased to exist. In his dispatch, Major General C.M. Maltby wrote about the conduct of troops under his command in Hong Kong and mentions the 5th 7th Rajput Regiment. This battalion fought well on the mainland, and the repulse of the enemy attack on Devil's Peak was entirely successful. The force of the enemy's initial attack on the island fell on this battalion and they fought gallantly until they had suffered heavy casualties. 100% of the British officers and most senior Indian officers being lost and were overrun. Hong Kong and Singapore Royal Artillery. Hong Kong and Singapore Royal Artillery, which was raised with troops recruited from undivided India, also suffered heavy casualties during the Battle of Hong Kong and are commemorated with names inscribed on panels at the entrance of Sai Wan War Cemetery. 144 killed, 45 missing, and 103 wounded. Many are buried right here. Sea Force. In late 1941, the British government accepted an offer by the Canadian government to send a battalion of the Royal Rifles of Canada from Quebec and Eastern Canada, and one of the Winnipeg Grenadiers from Manitoba, and a brigade headquarters of 1,975 personnel to reinforce the Hong Kong garrison. It was called Sea Force. It arrived on 16th November on board the troopship Awatea and the armed merchant cruiser HMCS Prince David. Here the guys are on the way. A total of 96 officers, 2 auxiliary supervisors, services supervisors, and 1,877 other ranks disembarked. Included were 2 medical officers and 2 nurses. 2 Canadian Dental Corps officers with assistants, 3 chaplains, and a detachment of the Canadian Postal Corps. A soldier of the Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps had stowed away and was sent back to Canada. Sea Force never received its vehicles, as the U.S. merchant ship San Jose, carrying them, was, at the outbreak of the war, diverted to Manila, to the Philippine Islands, at the request of the U.S. government. The Royal Rifles had served only in the Dominion of Newfoundland and St. John, New Brunswick, prior to posting to Hong Kong, and the Winnipeg Grenadiers had been deployed to Jamaica. Few Canadian soldiers had field experience, but were near fully equipped, except for having only 2 anti-tank rifles and no ammunition for 2-inch and 3-inch mortars, or for signal pistols, deficiencies which the British undertook to remedy in Hong Kong, although not at once. The Royal Marines. During the Battle of Hong Kong, there were 40 Royal Marines attached in HMS Tamar. When the battle began, the Royal Marines fought against Japanese force in Magazine Gap, along with HKVDC and Royal Engineers. Commanding Officer Major Giles R.M. instructed his men to defend the island to the last man and the last round. Other forces. The Chinese military mission to Hong Kong, initiated in 1938, was headed by Rear Admiral Chang Chuk and his aide, Lieutenant Commander Henry Su. It had the objective of coordinating Chinese war aims with the British in Hong Kong. Working with the British police, Chak organized pro-British agents among the population and rooted out triad factions sympathetic to the Japanese. On Christmas morning, Young informed Chak of his intent to surrender. Chak intended to break out and was given command of the 5 remaining motor torpedo boats. 68 men, including Chak, Su, and David Mercer McDougall, were successfully evacuated to Mirs Bay, where they contacted communist guerrillas and were escorted to Huizhou. For this feat, Chak was made an honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. A squad of Free French, under Captain Jacques Egal, happened to be in Hong Kong when the battle broke out and fought alongside the HKVDC at the North Point Power Station. They were all World War I veterans, as were the local HKVDC, and acquitted themselves well. The Japanese attack began shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning on 8th December 1941 on Hong Kong time, 4 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The difference in time and date is due to the day shift that occurs because of the international date line. Commanded by Major General Christopher Maltby, British, and the Canadian, and Indian, as well as the local Hong Kong Chinese Regiment and the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Force, resisted the Japanese attack by the Japanese 21st, 23rd, and 38th Regiments, Lieutenant General Takashi Sakai, but were outnumbered nearly 4-1. Japanese had 50,000, Allied had 14,000, and lacked their opponent's recent combat experience. The colony had no significant air defense. The RAF station at Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport, RAF Kai Tak, had only 5 airplanes. 2 were Supermarine Walrus amphibious aircraft and 3 Vickers Wildebeest torpedo reconnaissance bombers, flown and serviced by 7 officers and 108 airmen. An earlier request for a fighter squadron had been rejected, and the nearest fully operational RAF base was in Kota Baru, Malaya, nearly 2,250 kilometers or 1,400 miles away. Hong Kong also lacked adequate naval defenses. 3 destroyers were to withdraw to Singapore, the naval base. Kowloon and the New Territories. The Japanese bombed Kai Tak Airport on 8th December. 2 of the 3 Wildebeest and 2 Walruses were destroyed by 12 Japanese bombers. The attack also destroyed several civil aircraft, including all but 2 of the aircraft used by the air unit of the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps. The RAF and air unit personnel from then fought on as ground troops. 2 of the Royal Navy's 3 remaining destroyers were ordered to leave Hong Kong for Singapore. Only 1 destroyer, the HMS Garrison, several gunboats, and a flotilla of motor torpedo boats remain. On 8th, 9th, and 10th December, 8 American pilots of the China National Aviation Corporation, the CNAC, and their crews flew 16 sorties between Kai Tak Airport and landing fields at Namyong and Chongqing, the wartime capital of the Republic of China. The crews evacuated 275 persons, including Madame Sun Yat-sen, the widow of Sun Yat-sen, and the Chinese finance minister, Tong Sang-sai. Here is a picture of Canadian troops holding their positions over Kowloon. Here is a picture of Japanese artillery firing on Kowloon. Here is a picture of troops holding the gin drinkers line. The Commonwealth forces decided against holding the Sham Chung River and instead established 3 battalions on the gin drinkers line across the hills. The Japanese 38th Infantry Division, under the command of Major General Takashi Sakai, quickly forded the Sham Chung River over temporary bridges. Early on 10th December, the 228th Infantry Regiment of Colonel Teihichi of the 38th Division attacked the Commonwealth defenses at the Shingmun Redoubt, defended by A Company of the 2nd Battalion Royal Scots under Lieutenant Colonel S. White. The line was breached in 5 hours, and later that day the Royal Scots also withdrew from Golden Hill until D Company of the Royal Scots counterattacked and recaptured the hill. By 10 o'clock, the hill was again taken by the Japanese. This made the situation on the New Territories and Kowloon untenable, and the evacuation to Hong Kong Island started on 11 December under aerial bombardment and artillery fire. As much as possible, military and harbor facilities were demolished before the withdrawal. By 13th December, the 5th 7th Rajputs of the Indian Army under Lieutenant Colonel R. Cadogan Rawlinson, the last Commonwealth troops on the mainland, had retreated to Hong Kong Island. Hong Kong Island. Maltby organized the defense of the island, splitting it between an East Brigade and a West Brigade. On 15th December, the Japanese began systematic bombardment of the island's north shore. 2 demands for surrender were made on 13th and 17th December. When these were rejected, Japanese forces crossed the harbor on the evening of 18th December and landed on the island's northeast. They suffered only light casualties, although no effective command could be maintained until the dawn came. That night, approximately 20 Commonwealth gunners were executed, at the Saiwan Battery despite having surrendered. There was a further massacre of prisoners, this time of medical staff, and the Salesian mission on Chaiwan Road. In both cases, a few men survived. Here is a picture of Japanese troops in Shimsha-tsui. On the morning of 19th December, fierce fighting continued on Hong Kong Island, but the Japanese annihilated the headquarters of the West Brigade, causing the death of Brigadier John Lawson, the commander of the West Brigade. A British counterattack could not force them from the Wong Nai Chung Gap that secured the passage between the northeast at Causeway Bay and the secluded southern parts of the island. From 20th December, the island became split in two, with the British Commonwealth forces still holding out around the Stanley Peninsula and in the west of the island. At the same time, water supplies started to run short as the Japanese captured the island's reservoirs. On the morning of 25th December, Japanese soldiers entered the British field hospital at St. Stephen's College, and in the St. Stephen's College incident, tortured and killed a large number of injured soldiers, along with the medical staff. By the afternoon of 25th December 1941, it was clear that further resistance would be futile, and British colonial officials headed by the Governor of Hong Kong, Sir Mark Etchison Young, surrendered in person at the Japanese headquarters on the third floor of the Peninsula Hong Kong Hotel. This was the first occasion on which a British Crown colony had surrendered to an invading force. British Somaliland fell to the Italians in August 1940, but this was a protectorate. The garrison had held out for 17 days. This day is known in Hong Kong as Black Christmas. Massacres. Cylon Hill. Perhaps as many as 28 people were massacred after the fight for Cylon Hill. These men were members of the 5th Anti-Aircraft Battery of the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps. At Shai Kai Wan, there was a Salesian mission being used as an advanced dressing station. On the night of 18th December, it was surrounded by troops of the 229th Infantry Regiment. At 0700 on 19th December, Captain Martin Banfield of the Canadian Medical Corps surrendered the station. 2 injured officers of the 7th Rajput Regiment were murdered upon arrival in an ambulance. The Japanese separated the male medical staff from the female, which were 2 nurses, whose lives were spared. All but 3 of the men were killed. Most of the victims were of the Royal Army Medical Corps, but also at least 2 men of the Royal Rifles of Canada and 2 civilians. Causeway Bay. 3 captured persons were executed at Causeway Bay, including a female air raid warden with the local air raid precautions. And Wong Nai Chung Gap. At Wong Nai Chung Gap, 10 men of the St. John ambulance were killed, as well as a policeman and a medic. Jardines Lookout. 4 men, each of the 3rd Company HKVDC and the Winnipeg Grenadiers, were massacred after battle at Jardines Lookout. 1 grenadier, a Private Kilfoyle, was killed on the forced march to North Point, according to witnesses. The Black Hole of Hong Kong. 4 men were killed in the so-called Black Hole of Hong Kong, which is a house on Blue Pool Road, including 2 Canadian officers. Blue Pool Road. Around 30 civilians of different ethnicities were massacred at Blue Pool Road. The Ridge, Overbays, and Euclid. In the worst massacre of POWs of the battle, the Japanese killed at least 47 after taking the Ridge. Among the dead were Major Charles Sidney Clark of China Command Headquarters, 2 men of the 12th and 20th Coastal Regiments of the Royal Artillery, 6 men of the Royal Army Service Corps, and 2 of the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps, 19 men of the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, and 3 of the Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps, and 14 men of the RASC Company. The Japanese also executed at least 14 captives at Overbays, men of the same units as the Ridge, but also including 3 Royal Rifles of Canada and an officer of the 1st Battalion, Middlesex Regiment. 7 were killed at Euclid, and another 38 known victims cannot be placed precisely at one of the three locations, Ridge, Overbays, or Eucliffe Ride, who was present at the surrender, stated later that he saw 50 bodies lying by the road, including 6 Middlesex men among them. These men may have been some of those attached to the Hong Kong Chinese Regiment. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission report also states that 5 men of the Royal Air Force went missing near the Ridge on 20th December, perhaps captured and killed. Deepwater Bay Ride. 6 men of the Middlesex were killed defending PB-14 at Deepwater Bay Ride at Lion Light. It is uncertain whether they were killed in action or murdered after capture. St. Stephen's College. The massacre perpetrated at St. Stephen's College is the least well known. Only 13 victims can be confirmed at the location, but reports and estimates put the real number as high as 99. The names of all the reported victims may never be known. Between 75 and 150 bodies were cremated by the victors in the aftermath of the battle, but this total includes the victims of the fighting around Stanley Fort, such as the men of the 965 Defense Battery. Although it is the most infamous massacre, it has been the hardest to match with records. 3 British and 4 Chinese nurses were said to have been raped and murdered, and 1 Canadian, Captain Overton Stark Hickey of the RCASC, murdered trying to stop the rapes. Besides the raped nurses, the medical staff suffered 2 deaths: a doctor shot in the head whilst attempting to escape, and 25 orderlies of the Indian Hospital Corps and St. John ambulance personnel. The 55 St. John victims of the Battle of Hong Kong are memorialized at the present headquarters in Hong Kong, but since no dates are given on the memorial, it is impossible to identify those killed at St. Stephen's. 4 Chinese servants and 1 civilian, Tan Chung-Huin, were killed. Tan is the only Chinese victim of this massacre known by name. Among the soldiers receiving treatment at the college, 2 riflemen were mutilated and murdered, and a further 56 men were reportedly bayoneted in their beds. Some of these men may have been Royal Rifles, whose deaths are incorrectly reported as occurring elsewhere on 26 December. Maryknoll Mission. At least 8 men, 6 of the Middlesex and 2 Royal Engineers, were killed after the capture of Maryknoll Mission. 4 members of the 8th Coastal Regiment, Royal Artillery, may have been killed here as well. Estimates of the number of men murdered vary from 11 to 16. And Brick Hill. 26 prisoners are believed to have been killed after the fighting for Brick Hill, but some of these may have died in the fight, including some of the 17 men of the heavy anti-aircraft Hong Kong and Singapore Royal Artillery, known to have died there. Most of the soldiers here murdered were Muslims, including 1 religious teacher. Aftermath. Casualties. The Japanese had at least 1,895 men killed of an estimated 6,000 casualties. Allied casualties were 1,111 men killed, 1,167 missing, and 1,362 wounded. Allied dead, including British, Canadian, and Indian soldiers, were eventually interred at Saiwan Military Cemetery and the Stanley Military Cemetery. Sea Force casualties in the battle were 23 officers and 267 other ranks killed or died of wounds, including 5 officers and 16 other ranks of the brigade headquarters, 7 officers and 123 men of the Royal Rifles, and 11 officers and 128 men of the Winnipeg Grenadiers. Sea Force also had 28 officers and 465 men wounded. Some of the dead were murdered by Japanese soldiers during or after surrender. Japanese soldiers committed a number of atrocities on 19 December when the aid post at the Salesian Mission near Sai Kui Wan was overrun. A total of 1,528 soldiers, mainly Commonwealth, predominantly Indians and Canadians, are either buried or commemorated there. There are also graves of other Allied combatants who died in the region during the war, including some Dutch sailors who were reinterred in Hong Kong after the war. The nearby Saiwan Battery, which buildings constructed as far back as 1890, housed the depot and record office of the Hong Kong Military Service Corps for nearly 4 decades after the war. The barracks were handed over to the government in 1985 and were subsequently converted into Lei Yu Mun Park and Holiday Village. At the end of February 1942, the Japanese government stated that numbers of prisoner of war in Hong Kong were British, 5,072, Canadian, 1,689, Indian, 3,829, others, 357, a total of 10,947. They were sent to Shanshui POW Camp, Argyle Street Camp for officers, North Point Camp for Canadians and Royal Navy, Maitong Camp for Indian prisoners, Yokohama Camp in Japan, here, Fukuoka Camp in Japan, and Osaka Camp in Japan. Of the Canadians captured during the battle, 267 subsequently perished in Japanese prisoner of war camps, mainly due to neglect and abuse. In December 2011, Toshiyuki Kato, Japan's parliamentary vice minister for foreign affairs, apologized for the mistreatment to a group of Canadian veterans of the Battle of Hong Kong. Enemy civilians, meaning Allied nationals, were interned at the Stanley internment camp. Initially, there were 2,400 internees, although this number was reduced by repatriations during the war. Interned persons who died and prisoners executed by the Japanese are buried in Stanley Military Cemetery. Isugaki Rensuke became the first Japanese governor of Hong Kong. This ushered in the 3 years and 8 months of Imperial Japanese administration. During the 3.5 years of occupation by the Japanese, an estimated 10,000 Hong Kong civilians were executed, while many others were tortured, raped, or mutilated. The local population in the rural New Territories, which is a mix of Hakka, Cantonese, and other Han Chinese groups, waged a guerrilla war with limited success. The resistance groups were known as the Gangju and Dongjiang forces. The Japanese razed several villages in reprisal. The guerrillas fought till the end of the Japanese occupation. General Takeshi Sakai, who led the invasion of Hong Kong and served as governor for some time, was tried as a war criminal and executed by a firing squad in 1946. There is a statue of an anonymous World War I soldier at Yutong Sin. The Battle of Hong Kong Memorial Plaque, dedicated to the defenders of Hong Kong in December 1941, is now what it is. Awards. There is a statue of an anonymous World War I soldier from Statuary Collection at Yutong Sin. Also visible is the Battle of Hong Kong Memorial Plaque, dedicated to all the defenders of Hong Kong in December 1941 through John Robert Osborne. Memorial Plaque dedicated to all the defenders of Hong Kong in December 1941 through John Robert Osborne and to commemorate the British garrison at Hong Kong. John Robert Osborne, 2nd January 1899 to 19 December 1941, was awarded the Victoria Cross. After seeing a Japanese grenade roll in through the doorway of a building, Osborne and his fellow Canadian Winnipeg Grenadiers had been garrisoning, he took off his helmet and threw himself on the grenade, saving the lives of over 10 other Canadian soldiers. He was born in Norfolk, England. Gander was a Newfoundland dog, posthumously awarded the Dickin Medal, the Animals Victoria Cross, in 2000 for his deeds in World War II, the first such award in over 50 years. He picked up a thrown Japanese hand grenade and rushed with it toward the enemy, dying in the ensuing explosion, but saving the lives of several wounded Canadian soldiers. Colonel Lance Newnham, Captain Douglas Ford, and Flight Lieutenant Hector Bertram Gray were awarded the George Cross for the gallantry they showed in resisting Japanese torture in the immediate aftermath of the battle. The men had been captured and were in the process of planning a mass escape by British forces. Their plan was discovered, but they had refused to disclose information under torture and were shot by firing squad. Commemoration. The cenotaph in central Hong Kong commemorates the defense as well as war dead from the First World War. The shield in the colonial emblem of Hong Kong, granted in 1959, featured the battlement design to commemorate the defense of Hong Kong during the Second World War. This coat of arms was in place until 1997, when it was replaced by the regional emblem. After the war, Lei Yun Mon Fort became a training ground for the British forces until 1987, when it was vacated. In view of its historical significance and unique architectural features, the formal Urban Council decided in 1993 to conserve and develop the fort into the Hong Kong Museum of Coastal Defense. With the groundskeeper, Mr. Kobayashi. Now we'll recite In Flanders Fields. Okay. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing's hands we throw, the torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Lieutenant Colonel John McRae, 1915, Second Battle of Ypres.
Salute.
To the fallen. Together we say this. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.